Hi everyone, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse, and welcome back to part 2 of my favorite thrillers of 2019. So I talked a lot in part 1. I decided to break this into 2 videos. I don't want to waste any more time. I will link part 1 above and below so you can click on that if you haven't seen it yet, and let's roll right into part 2. So the next book, which is another one that I compulsively read in 3 sittings, is My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. And this is another one of those books where I feel like people either completely loved it or completely didn't, and I completely loved it. I thought this was smart. I thought it was clever. It was not fast-paced. It was sort of pitched as Dexter meets Mr. and Mrs. Smith, so I thought it was going to be like this high-octane, high-action, which it wasn't, but I'm okay with that. But I feel like my expectations were a little bit off at the beginning. And basically this is about a couple who have been married for a long time. They have teenage kids. They're living their lives. Their marriage has sort of hit a bit of a slow spot, a little bit of a slump. So the way that they spice things up is they murder people, basically. Husband selects a girl. They do a bit of research, picks her out for his wife. She kills her. They cover it up. That's what they do for fun. A little spice in their marriage. Why go to marriage counseling when you could just be murdering people, right? So, highly unlikable people that I just loved. I just thought it was so good. And I will say there was an aspect at the end that I didn't love, but I was okay with all in because I thought it was a really good story. I ripped through it. I loved the complications. I loved the darkness of it. I just, all of it. I hesitate to say much because I don't want to give anything away. If you're thinking it's going to be high-octane thriller like I did, just know it isn't. But that doesn't make it not good. Just, I would say, adjust the expectations. It's smart. It's her first book. I just wanted to check that. It is a debut. I know she has another book coming out in 2020, which I'm really excited to read. But I thought it was clever. I loved the premise of it. The things you do for love, basically. The next book that made my favorites list was a reread, which is another thing that took me by surprise in that I kind of forgot how much I loved this book, and it's Postmortem by Patricia Cornwell. And this is the first book in her Kay Scarpetta series, which came out in 89 or 90. And being back in that world, 1990, was so fun in so many different ways. And this is, make no mistake, this is a super dark book. Kay Scarpetta is a medical examiner down in Virginia. There is a serial killer on the loose, and she is working with Detective Pete Marino of the police department down there on solving this crime. And Pete is not always a likable character. He has a whole lot of hang-ups. He can be super judgmental about a whole lot of things. He says a lot of things that you don't like, but he is a really narrow-minded small-town cop. And Kay is sort of his rival in some ways, but his partner in other ways. And we're in it with them in a time where DNA is not a thing, and there are fax machines, and there is smoking in the morgue, and we're waiting days upon days to even get a phone call to someone to do some real legwork and to figure out the past of people and to find out, where was someone before they were home that night or who might have seen them last. It is not this easy breezy CSI kind of modern day crime solving that we are so used to. So I very much enjoyed, there's no cell phones. We're talking pay phones. You can't make the call till you get into the office. When you are stuck in that dark alley, my God, are you stuck in that dark alley? But it's so good, and it makes things so much harder for people, for our heroes in this book, which I love. And I read this series probably halfway through before I stopped reading it and just, I've talked about this a bunch of times. Your tastes change and your interests change and things change in your life. So I stopped reading them. And I forgot how much I enjoyed these books. And I think reading them again now and in retrospect, I have a completely different appreciation, not only for what a groundbreaking character Kay Scarpetta was at the time, but also to be able to go back to the beginning when these characters are first meeting and knowing in my head where they wind up, at least as far into the series as I have read, but seeing them sort of get to know each other at the beginning. And Patricia Cornwell didn't necessarily know, A, that this was going to be a series that carried on for 20 years, never mind that some of these characters would continue to weave through all of the stories. So it's really interesting to see where she started from. And on top of all that, this book was so freaking scary. Like, I could not read this book before I went to bed. And I don't distinctly remember being that freaked out the first time around. It was a long time ago. But this book scared me big time. So props to her for scaring me completely. And also for writing just such a compelling story and such incredible characters. So I did read the second book in the series this year. I am going to continue next year. I totally enjoyed revisiting these, but like, top favorite of this year for sure, and so glad I picked it back up again. Another book that kept me up at night was Rules for Vanishing by Kate Alice Marshall. And this book came as a recommendation from Julie at Pages and Pens. And this is kind of mystery, suspense, horror, ghost story-ish. So there's a little Blair Witchy going on in it. And this is another one I couldn't read before bed because it freaked me out. And this is about a group of friends who are in high school, and our main character, Sarah, her sister disappeared a year ago. And there's sort of this urban legend that once a year, a path in the woods opens up. And I don't know if it was like 40 or 50 years ago, a little girl named Lucy went into the woods and never came back out again. And kind of like in a Blair Witchy kind of way, there's a story about how she haunts the woods, and people have gone in the search for Lucy, and some people have just disappeared into the woods and never been heard from again. So it is sort of the anniversary of the night her sister had left, and Sarah wants to go into the woods to find her sister. And these friends of theirs, so it was her and her sister's friends, kind of show up for her that night, and they all go into the woods together. And it becomes what happens that night in the woods. And it is scary and amazing and creepy. And it is a story about the friendship and the love between all of these people, and a complete like horror story on top of it. And one of the many things that I loved about this book is that it was told in such an interesting format, in that it opens with a doctor sort of with one of the people in the book, and that person recapping what happened that night in the woods. And not all the memories are clear, and they're not totally sure what happened. And they're trying to piece together what happened through text messages, through videos that people took on their phones or their cameras that were recovered, and then through the memory of the people that they're speaking with. And I'm being specifically vague because I don't want to give anything away. And what I loved about this book is I was reading it and I was in it, and then there would be parts where I was like, wait, what happened? How did we get here? And I would like flip back and be like, did I miss something? But the way this author like sort of sprinkled breadcrumbs and really messed with your mind in a lot of ways, I thought was just genius. So again, from like writer's hat on, this was such like an incredibly well done mystery. And from a storytelling standpoint, I just thought it was amazing. So never in 100 years would I have picked this book up had it not been for Julie mentioning it on her channel. She raved about it. I don't do this often. I like put on my shoes, got in the car, went to Barnes & Noble, and I bought it because I just needed to know what all the hype was about, and I devoured it when I read it. Just so good. So freaking good. Another book that I had heard so much chit chat about and had resisted for no good reason, because everything about it is something I would have liked. It was dual timelines, it was boarding school, it was a mystery from the past, influencing a mystery in the present tense. So what took me so long, I have no idea, but I read Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson and also loved it, obviously, because it's on this list. And this is the first book in a trilogy. I did read the sequel, The Vanishing Stair, and then I want to say it's Hand on the Clock. Comes out in January, so I'm excited to read it. But this is a story about Stevie Bell, who is basically an amateur detective, and she is obsessed with this crime that happened back in the 30s at the school called Ellingham Academy. And way, way, way back when, the headmaster of the school's wife and daughter are kidnapped. And this ransom note, if you will, is left for him. And it's signed Truly Devious. And it's a ransom note that is sort of based very much in the flair of Dorothy Parker. And I won't read the whole thing to you because it's long, but just to give you a taste of it, it's like, look, a riddle, time for fun. Should we use a rope or gun? Knives are sharp and gleam so pretty, poisoned slow, which is a pity. And the case was never solved. And Stevie is completely obsessed with it. And she finds a way to get into Ellingham Academy, which is this very exclusive school in Vermont for a very exclusive group of people. But if you get in, it is like all paid. There's no tuition. They are just hyper selective about who they let in. And she is there, and she is committed to figuring out this crime. And there is a very interesting cast of characters that she meets up there, and schoolmates and friends that she makes. And you gotta know some bad stuff is gonna happen while she's investigating this crime. And it does. And I loved it. Again, the writing was so good. The language was great. The authenticity to these characters. Stevie is just, I love her to bits. I think she is such a great character. She is strong. She is stubborn. She's determined. She is not without her flaws. She suffers from anxiety and panic attacks, but it is not in a way that is like a plot device. It is who she is. It's a part of her character. It's a part of her as a person. And I just loved how that was woven in, because it is a very real thing that people deal with on a daily basis. And there is great diversity in this book. I didn't feel like anything was a plot device. I didn't feel like anything was in there just to serve the story. I just thought it was great. I thought it was really well done. My only beef with this, which I have talked about, is that it leaves you on a cliffhanger. And the only thing that made it okay is that by the time I got into this, The Vanishing Stair already existed. But had I read this book when it first came out, I probably would have been furious. But it was very much like season 1 of The Killing, where they don't solve the crime in season 1. But all good things happen in the second book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I did hear some chit chat about how some people didn't think The Vanishing Stair stood up, but I thought it was great. I liked where that went. I was wholly satisfied with it. I was satisfied with this book as well, but it does leave you wanting more, and that's probably on purpose. So I totally recommend it. I thought it was just really, really well done, and I thought it was a smart mystery. I'm super curious to see how it all concludes. But again, another book that completely surprised me in all the best ways. Okay, so we are down to my last 2 books, and I would be hard-pressed to tell you which one I loved more, because I thought they were both incredible for different reasons. I think I loved both of them, and I'm just going to tell you that they are both top of my list, but I have to talk about one of them first. So the one I'm going to talk about first is 13 by Steve Kavanaugh, and this is a book I picked up at the end of 2018. I was shopping at Book Depository, and it came up kind of like as a recommendation for me, and I saw the line on the front cover that says the serial killer is not on trial, he's on the jury. And I literally like added it to my basket. I was like, I don't even need to know more than this. I am sold. So this book had been out in the UK for a while, and it has since obviously come out here in the US, and kind of taken, Steve Kavanaugh has sort of taken off because of it. This is actually the 4th book in a series, which I didn't realize when I got it. I will say most people whose reviews I have seen of this book didn't realize that when they got it and read it, but it doesn't really matter. So yes, there are, I would say, some light spoilers to earlier books in the series, but whatever. Don't let that be a reason not to pick up this book, because you can dive right in, because it explains enough in the background for you. And what this book is, again, so you've got the serial killer, is there is this Hollywood star who is standing trial for murdering his wife and the bodyguard, because apparently they were having an affair, and the movie star lost his mind and murdered both of them in their townhouse in Manhattan. And he is claiming he's innocent. So his defense team is made up of sort of this high-powered group of people, and they bring in Eddie Flynn, who is kind of used to be a bit of a con man, bit scrappy. He's maybe a little bit of a shady past to him, but like he gets stuff done. He's gritty. He's got connections. Nothing, I guess, really would sort of scare him, and he wholly commits to solving this murder and proving our movie star is innocent of it all. But at the same time, we have the perspective of our serial killer, who is committed to making sure that this movie star takes the rap for this murder that he's committed. So he will do anything to get himself onto this jury to make sure that that verdict happens. And he is probably, he goes by the name Kane in this book. Kane is probably one of the scariest characters I have read in a really long time. This is another book that completely freaked me out. Nightmare potential is 100%. Kane is scary. He is creepy. Nothing gets in his way. There is nothing he won't do. He is a messed up dude. He is an awful human being. He is one of the scariest characters I have ever read in my entire life. And I just loved this book. And one of the things that I loved, I used to be hardcore into like courtroom thriller Grisham books and anything that involved courtrooms. Like I was just picking up those books like crazy for a really, really long time. And I just stopped reading them because whatever, couldn't even tell you. There is a huge courtroom aspect to this. So if that's not your thing, just sort of consider yourself warned. I loved it because it is all about building the case to prove the innocence of the movie star. And they're in the courtroom, so you see all of this stuff play out. And then you also, again, get the serial killer in alternating sort of chapters and perspectives. He's awful. He's horrible. He's so scary. But I loved it. I thought it was so well done. I loved the story. I loved the twists. I loved all of it. All of it. All of it. Cannot wait to read more Steve Kavanaugh. I have picked up his newer book called Twisted. I have 2 of the previous books in this series. I have heard they're not as good as this. I would like to say I will get to them at some stage of the game, but he is a great writer. And again, jump right in with this one. Don't even worry about where you're at in the series because this is 100% worth reading. And then the last book that I want to rave about this year is Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier. And this is a book that, again, blew me away. And there is a huge theme that you will have picked up on by now of darkness in books that I just loved. And this is a book that I had picked up at the end of 2018 from Book Outlet. She was an author that I was made aware of / introduced to at Thriller Fest in 2018. She was on a panel of newer authors along with Riley Sager, which is how I figured out who he was, which was probably one of the best panels I went to. And Jar of Hearts had just sort of come out at that point, and everybody was talking about it, and I was super curious about it and had it on my list, and I picked it up and I put it on my shelf like I do. And for whatever reason, I was compelled to pick it up this year, and I'm so happy I did. It was so much darker, so much more twisted than I expected, and I loved every bit of it because she didn't hold back. She made these characters do some pretty horrible things. This, again, in that vein of A Kind Worth Killing and Gone Girl, where you have these completely unlikable characters that you like reading about, or that maybe you're rooting for, or that you're so invested in. And I had the absolute honor of meeting Jennifer Hillier in person this year. I lugged my book with me into the city. She signed it for me. I had a chance to talk to her, and I told her that I was so grateful that she didn't hold back and that she went there and she went to all the dark places. And she was so sweet and she was so kind. And she said that she felt like when she was writing this book, she had nothing to lose, and she put everything she had into it. And as a writer, that just like completely resonated with me, and I loved it. And I just found it such an inspiring, just little nugget of, I don't even think she meant it as a piece of advice, of just honesty, that she just went all in. And I had watched her on a different panel this year where she talked about how earlier in her career she didn't have that same confidence to be able to push back. And she did make edits and she did make changes to, I want to say it was her first book that she wasn't necessarily thrilled about, but she did it because she felt like she had to. And she is at a point in her career where she doesn't have to do that, and she could be fearless, and she was. And I'm so glad she did. Okay, so I didn't even tell you what this book was about. This book is about Georgina, who back in high school, Georgina, Angela, and Brody were the best of friends. And when she was 16, Angela, who was sort of like, I want to say she was like captain of the cheerleaders, and she was like everything, disappears. And it's, yes, 16, so it's like their junior year. And there's sort of this little sort of romantic triangle thing kind of happening, but Georgina was also dating this guy Calvin at the time, who was kind of a sketchball even back then. And sort of all these years later, Georgina's like living the high life. She is engaged to the son of like this big company where she's a VP up in Seattle, and she's like living her best life, and she's one of these like top executives, under the age of 30 or 35 or whatever the heck it is, but everything is perfect. Her life is absolutely perfect. But then the remains of Angela are found in the woods pretty close to Georgina's house. And Calvin, who has been convicted of murdering a bunch of other girls, who was her boyfriend at the time, is taking the blame for Angela's murder. But then sweet Georgina, super early on, like page 2, winds up getting cuffs slapped on her and going to court and going to jail for what happened that night. And for 14 years, she has kept the secrets of what has happened the night that Angela went missing. And this story is about the dual timelines of what happens in the past and Georgina going to prison and coming out of prison. And now that she's out of jail, sort of how her past comes back to haunt her and what she will still do to protect secrets of what happened that night, and just trying to move on with her life if that's even possible. I hesitate to say too much because I don't want to give anything away. This book is dark. It is twisted. There are parts that are not easy to read for sure, but it is so incredibly done. I loved it. Like, I just thought it was fearless in the writing. I thought it was just complicated, complex, ugly characters, yet I still found myself rooting for people. I just blown out of the water, absolutely blown out of the water. Hands down, one of the best books of 2019 for me. So that's going to do it for my best of thriller, mystery, suspense, horror, all that good stuff of 2019. So many incredible books. It was hard to narrow this down because I did read so many books that I loved, and I can't say enough about any of these. I recommend them all. There's something about each and every one of them that I absolutely loved. And again, there was just whether they were the best because the story itself or the writing or the characters or the mystery or the fact that it surprised me or took me to a place I didn't think I was ever going to go, emotionally, mentally, any of it. I just thought they were all such incredible books. So there you have it, my faves of the year. I would love to know if you guys have read any of these or what your favorites were. Let me know. Obviously, more books to read. It's a new year is coming, so I'm looking for some more recommendations. But this is it for me. Thank you guys for watching. I know that this turned out to be way longer than I had expected, but I don't know how to not say a lot about books. So there you have it. But thanks for watching, and I will see you guys really soon. Bye, everyone.